So I just saw Old, the latest movie from M. Night Shyamalan, and it was a movie. Now, for those of you unaware, M. Night Shyamalan is a director with quite a reputation. People really love his early movies, and then as you keep going through his filmography, it just slowly begins to go downhill with the critical and audience reception. Now, I haven't actually seen The Sixth Sense, Signs, The Village, or The Happening, but of the ones I have seen, I can confirm that there is definitely a noticeable slump. But with his earlier bad films, there seems to be a commonality between them in that people find them pretty entertaining. It's been a while since I've seen The Last Airbender, so I can't say too much about that one, but I can confirm that Lady in the Water and After Earth do make for pretty good So Bad It's Good movies. With After Earth, though, it became very clear that the studios considered M. Night's name a liability, considering it was nowhere to be found in any of the marketing. His movies after this point were a lot more inconsistent and kind of more annoying, to be honest. In 2015, he returned with The Visit, which was supposedly his return to form. But of the films I have seen from him, this is easily his least bearable in my opinion. I wouldn't call it technically his worst film, but it is definitely his most irritating and the one I least want to see again. It's a really terribly done found footage horror comedy that I could not recommend in the slightest. He then followed this one up with Split, which is kind of incredible, to be honest. I know a lot of people do not really like this one, and I completely understand why. If you look at this movie as a piece of representation towards the community of people with dissociative identity disorder, then it does not do a particularly good job at that, and that is definitely the movie's weakest aspect. But if you just look at it as a movie and a piece of fiction, then it's pretty fantastic in nearly every way. Even though I went into this movie with somewhat positive expectations from the trailer, I was still pleasantly surprised that it delivered. So naturally, I wasn't too surprised when I learned that this was actually based off of a script that M. Night had been writing since when he was making movies people liked. Whereas his next movie, Glass, the crossover between Split and Unbreakable, the two movies of his that I genuinely love, was one of his modern scripts, and it really showed. This is a movie I initially reviewed very positively and then watched again and realized kinda sucked and couldn't tell why I liked it so much. For some ungodly reason, I gave this movie an 8 out of 10, and I still debate deleting that review because my opinions on it have changed so drastically and I agree with basically nothing I said. It's like a 4 or 5 out of 10, maybe. I'm still not sure where I stand on it 100% to be honest. So yeah, it had been quite a while since M. Night had made one of his treasured So Bad It's Good movies. So in that sense, I would argue that Old is his return to form because this movie is hilarious. Old is an adaptation of the graphic novel Sandcastle, and it is M. Night Shyamalan's second adaptation, because the last one turned out so well. But with The Last Airbender, M. Night Shyamalan was adapting one of the most beloved animated series of all time, and Sandcastle is a graphic novel with middling reviews. Seems like a recipe for success if you ask me. The acting in this movie is pretty consistently hysterical, and I didn't buy any of the performances. There's also a lot of really goofy facial expressions. The line delivery is consistently silly. I can see some people praising the casting choices in this movie. You know, because they cast the kids and then they cast the actors who were older but look like the kids. But again, none of them are convincing. And on top of that, I don't buy some of these actors as the ages they're supposedly representing. Alex Wolff is the teenage version of his character, and when we first meet him, he is supposedly 15. The dialogue is not consistent enough, and some of it is too juvenile for his character, and some of it is too mature for his character. But even with all that said, this does not look like a 15-year-old. The dialogue in this movie is wince-worthy and very transparent. There's no subtlety, there's no effort, it's the most bare-bones thing in the world to the point where it was pretty laughable. Every line of dialogue before they get to the beach is the most painfully obvious thing in the world. This is the kind of dialogue someone would joke about after hearing the concept of this movie, and it's actually in the film. The film is not particularly well shot, the framing choices were often bland, and there's a lot of one-takes in this movie, but most of them are handled pretty poorly. There's one very early on in the movie where the camera is panning, essentially following the character's actions behind a window. That one looked pretty nice, why don't the others look good? This movie is edited pretty badly, at points the editing caused it to look like an SNL skit. The musical score was formulaic and boring. There's an original song featured in this movie, and it is also transparent and obvious because this movie does not know how to display subtlety. The direction feels awkward, there's color grading choices to try and influence the tone of a scene that do not fit. Nothing feels consistent, nothing feels important, there's no weight to anything. I guess what kept this movie entertaining for me was the script. Every piece of reincorporation was one you could see coming from a mile away. All of the characters in this movie are so one-note and lacking in personality, they're all just there to serve their purpose in the plot and then die. Structurally, the film kinda wants to feel like a slasher, but it's just a movie about a beach, so they have to find ways for characters to die. And maybe if they were more patient with this film, then that could have been possible. Seriously, for a movie about growing old, you'd think the pacing wouldn't feel so slapdash. Some of the character names in this movie are also pretty funny. There's a character named Guy, which is just an inherently funny name to me. And I'm sure many of you are fully aware that one of the characters in this movie is called Mid-Sized Sedan. Now going into this film, I really was not expecting it to make much sense at all, but this is one of those movies that sets specific rules up for itself and then does not follow a single one of them. So on this beach, half an hour is 1 year, which means 1 minute is about 12 days, give or take. So realistically, within 30 seconds of being on this beach, every character would have died. They brought a lot of food onto the beach, and it's revealed that they basically needed it so that the kids could actually have their body mass grow properly, and so the kids are always hungry. But if you are going to specifically draw attention to the fact that characters are getting hungry and need food for body mass, then everyone is going to be thinking, oh, what about starvation or thirst? I genuinely cannot recall a single moment in this movie where an adult character ate or drank whilst on the beach. When the characters clue into what's happening with the beach and aging, they're wondering, hey, wouldn't our hair and nails be growing like crazy? And one of the characters is like, well, you see, because they're dead cells, that won't be the case, so maybe dead cells just aren't affected, and then the movie rolls with this logic as if it's gospel. But characters very clearly grow facial hair throughout this movie. The color in people's hair starts to change at points too. Towards the end of the movie, one of the characters' hair looks professionally done all of a sudden. To be honest, I was kind of disappointed by the hair and makeup work in this movie. There are multiple points where people are like, wow, you're getting older, you have wrinkles, but there's no wrinkles, they don't look any different from the last scene. To quickly go back to the dead cells argument though, how is a body able to decompose on the beach if dead cells are not affected, and furthermore, how is it able to decompose really quickly on the beach if dead cells are not affected? Another thing that bugged me about the logical standpoint of this movie is how characters mature. I already mentioned with Alex Wolff's performance, the dialogue does not really help his case because half of it is way too mature and half of it is way too juvenile, but the characters just start talking about concepts that they are completely unfamiliar with. Two of the children arrived at the age of 6 and are now teenagers, and they're talking about how they're never gonna get to have prom. Also, based on the implications of how Alex Wolff's character matured, either he just randomly learned how to have sex, or he was taught the ins and outs of how to do it at the age of like 5. This movie made no sense whatsoever, but there's a couple of things about it in particular that I do want to go into that revolve around spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers for old, then skip to the time code on the screen now. 3, 2, 1, go. So the characters realize that at least one person in each of the groups has some sort of illness. The mom of the main family has a tumor, one of the characters has a calcium deficiency, one of the characters has epilepsy, and one of the characters is a schizophrenic. The schizophrenic character is also a doctor, and the husband of the character with epilepsy is a nurse. And so at one point they realize that they're going to have to take out the mom's tumor or she's going to die. And so the doctor cuts her open, but her skin instantly just heals and the cut shuts. So he opens her back up and has other characters hold her open so that he can just lift out the tumor. Apparently it just wasn't connected to anything, I guess. The schizophrenic character is also kinda racist for the entire movie. And he also gets more and more violent as he gets older. So he stabs mid-sized Sedan to death, and his cuts don't heal or anything, he just actually dies of being stabbed to death. But then later on he's attacking the mom and the dad, and the mom finds a rusted knife from earlier and cuts him with it, and she's like, it's rust, so you're gonna get an infection and die, teehee. And so he dies within like 30 seconds as his body randomly turns black. But if we are now going to be opening up to the idea of infections, then you had an open, gaping wound with people's dirty, sandy hands inside it for like a week and a half, and you did not get any sort of infection. If you're going to introduce the re-healing instantly and the infection thing, at least keep it somewhat consistent. Also, whilst we're here, the twist is just the twist from Glass again, I guess. Wow, there was actually this big conglomerate company conspiracy behind it the whole time, and then they get thwarted at the end by an expose. Wow, what a shocker, this has never been done by M. Night before. The last 10 or so minutes of this movie are just so lazy from a screenwriting perspective because it is literally just the ending of Glass again. Except this time, instead of eliminating superheroes from the world, the company is testing out meds to cure illnesses. So by sending their unknowing subjects to the beach, they can get all of the results they need within a day. It was handled pretty hilariously, but if M. Night does this for a third movie in a row after this, I swear to God. So yeah, in conclusion, this movie was pretty bad. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention, some of the very subtle visual effects usage was pretty good. I like the shot where the finger wrinkles slightly, that's pretty cool. But overall, I found this movie to be pretty entertaining and pretty hilarious. And it's even already being memed online. That's the sign of a great M. Night movie right there. I would highly recommend this movie, it made me laugh quite a lot. And I'm giving Old a 2 out of 10. That's the end of this video, like, share, subscribe, I'm bad at outros, and I'll see you in whatever I do next.